Some people are born for grunt work, not critical thinking. That is what Dr. Whitfield said 47 minutes before everything changed. Katie Rodriguez slips past the security desk at Cedar Creek Medical in Portland carrying a worn tote bag, the canvas faded to the color of old parchment. Inside, nestled beneath a cardigan and a dog-eared nursing journal, sits a pair of combat boots. Desert tan leather, scuffed at the heel, with sand still embedded in the treads from Tikrit. The kind of sand that doesn't wash out. The kind that stays. The ICU hums with the familiar chorus of machines, ventilators wheeze their mechanical rhythm, monitors beep their ceaseless count, for pumps click with metronomic precision. Katie moves through the ward with the practiced invisibility of someone who has spent years learning how not to be seen. Her scrubs are 3 years old, faded blue, pilled at the elbows. Her name badge reads Catherine Murphy, BSN, RN. It's not entirely a lie. Catherine is her first name. The middle part is the fiction. She stops at room for 12. Commander James Harding has been unconscious for 6 days. The official report calls it a training accident, a fall from rigging during a SEAL team qualification course. The real story sits behind classified redactions in a file she will never be allowed to read. What matters now is that his vitals are stable and his neurological status is unchanged. What matters now is that his right forearm bears a tattoo in bold block letters, Rodriguez. Katie checks his peripheral lines with the precision of someone trained in military field medicine. 14 gauge for in the left AC, saline running at a keep vein open rate. The right arm, the one with the tattoo, shows early signs of edema, slight discoloration along the radial side. She makes a note. The form might be infiltrating. She'll need to replace it before the fluid damages the surrounding tissue. Her hands move without hesitation, without the self-consciousness that often comes with being watched. These hands have done this before. Not in hospitals. In sandstorms and firefights and forward operating bases where the only light came from headlamps and the only sound was the rotor wash of incoming birds. She adjusts the ventilator settings, checking the pressure gradient, the tidal volume, the FiO2 percentage. 40%. His oxygen saturation is holding at 94. Good. She records everything with the same meticulous detail she would have used logging casualty counts in a casualty collection point she ran alone for 14 hours in the Jolon district. Pain is data. Vitals are data. Every number tells a story if you know how to read it. At the nurse's station, Katie logs her notes into the computer terminal, her fingers moving across the keyboard with a rhythm that suggests competence rather than hurry. A surgical resident named Patterson approaches, his white coat still crisp from the laundry, his stethoscope draped around his neck like a badge of status. He's looking at Harding's chart over her shoulder. "Your patient?" he asks, squinting at the monitor strips. "Yes," Katie says. "Interesting scarring on the neck," Patterson observes. He's looking at the thin white lines visible above her scrub collar, shrapnel patterns, though not from any car accident. What happened there? Katie doesn't look up from the keyboard. Car accident. Long time ago. It's the story she's prepared. It's the story that fits a nurse named Catherine Murphy from Salem, Oregon. It's the story that doesn't mention IEDs or convoy ambushes or the moment a piece of shrapnel the size of a thumbnail tore through her deltoid before lodging in her spine. Pain is data. Some data doesn't need to be shared. Patterson nods, accepting the answer, moving on to bug someone else about something else. Katie finishes her documentation and rises from the chair, her left side engaging slightly before her right. The limp is less pronounced than it was 6 months ago. Physical therapy. Time. The body adapts. The body is a remarkable machine for adaptation. Dr. Whitfield arrives at 1,447 hours for afternoon rounds. His Gucci loafers click against the tile floor in a rhythm that suggests he's never had to move quietly through dangerous places. His tie is silk, navy with thin gold stripes. His hair is silver and expensive looking. He carries himself with a kind of posture that comes from a lifetime of assuming the room will arrange itself around him. At Cedar Creek Medical, He is the chief of cardiothoracic surgery. He is the one who decides whose chest gets opened and whose chest remains sealed. He is the one with the power. Katie watches him from the supply room, where she's restocking the crash cart. She doesn't hide. Hiding would be noticeable. Instead, she simply doesn't make herself remarkable. She is background. She is furniture. She is the kind of person people look through rather than at. Whitfield moves through the ICU with his entourage, 2 residents, a medical student, a respiratory therapist who walks 3 steps behind as if in the wake of his authority. He approaches Harding's room, stops, glances at the chart. His expression doesn't change. He turns to the chief of surgery, Dr. Melissa Chen, who is standing beside him with her arms crossed. The two of them have worked together for 9 years. They have operated on 1,400 patients together. They understand each other with the efficiency of a machine designed specifically for partnership. "The seal," Whitfield says, nodding toward the room. "Still no change." "Still no change," Chen confirms. "Neurologically unchanged since admission. We're maintaining supportive care while the intracranial swelling resolves." Whitfield's expression suggests he finds this information neither surprising nor particularly relevant. He turns and begins walking toward the medication station, his entourage following like planets orbiting a sun. Katie is at the vending machine near the break room, inserting coins for black coffee. She doesn't need to be here. She could have made coffee in the staff lounge. But the vending machine is in a hallway where conversations carry, where voices reverberate off tile and fluorescent lights. Whitfield and Chen arrive at the medication station, and Katie feeds her dollar bill into the machine, watching the mechanical spiral turn, waiting for her coffee to drop. She doesn't look at them. She doesn't adjust her body or change her breathing. She becomes the kind of background noise that experienced people learn to filter out. "The new ICU nurse," Whitfield says to Chen, his voice pitched at the level of professional conversation. He's not whispering, which means he doesn't care if anyone hears. "What's her background?" "Murphy." Chen shrugs. "Standard credentials. Came with good references from a Navy medical placement program. Been here 5 months. Solid work ethic." "Solid work ethic," Whitfield repeats, his tone suggesting he finds the phrase quaint. "Some people are born for grunt work, not critical thinking. They do fine as long as you keep them pointed in the right direction." The vending machine releases her coffee. It drops into the tray with a mechanical click. Katie retrieves it, her hand steady, her face showing nothing. Her jawline doesn't tighten. Her shoulders don't tense. She simply takes the cup and turns to walk back toward the ICU. Her left side engages. Her stride is even. But that wasn't the worst part. Katie passes Harding's room and notices his vital signs have shifted. BP is holding, but his CVP line shows a slight elevation. Central venous pressure climbing. She makes a mental note and continues to her next patient, an elderly woman recovering from a valve replacement. The woman's name is Margaret. She has grandchildren. She likes mystery novels. Katie adjusts her checks her wound dressing, documents her findings with the same meticulous precision she applies to every patient. 2 hours later, Katie observes what she's been watching for. Harding's breathing pattern has changed. Slightly faster. His oxygen saturation has dipped to 91%. His heart rate is creeping up. She pulls up his imaging studies from the past 4 days and compares them to what she's seeing. The echocardiogram from yesterday shows no pericardial effusion. But something is wrong. Pain is data. These vital signs are data. And the data is telling her that fluid is accumulating around his heart. She walks to the supply room and retrieves a pericardiocentesis kit, the needle, the catheter, the collection bags. She carries it back to her station and logs onto the computer, preparing to contact the physician. Dr. Whitfield is in the break room. Katie finds him there at 1,623 hours, standing at the refrigerator with a container of Greek yogurt. She approaches with the kit in her hands and speaks with a measured tone she's perfected over 9 years in the military and 5 months in civilian hospitals. "Doctor, I need to request a pericardiocentesis for Commander Harding. His CVP is elevated, his O2 is dropping, and his heart rate is trending up. I believe we're looking at cardiac tamponade." Whitfield closes the refrigerator and turns to face her. His expression is the kind of blank slate that comes right before anger. He looks at the kit in her hands. He looks back at her face. And then he sets his yogurt container on the counter with a deliberate slowness that suggests he is choosing not to throw it. "You believe we're looking at cardiac tamponade," he repeats. His voice has dropped an octave. "Do you understand what your scope of practice is, or do you need me to explain it to you in smaller words?" Katie doesn't respond. Responding to insults is what breaks composure. Responding is what they want. "You are a floor nurse," Whitfield continues, moving closer to her. His posture is relaxed, his hands open at his sides. This is the posture of someone who has never had to worry about a physical threat. You monitor vital signs. You change dressings. You call the doctor when something needs to be called. You do not diagnose cardiac emergencies. You do not practice above your licensure. And you certainly do not go around requesting invasive procedures like some kind of, he pauses, searching for the word that will land most effectively. Like some kind of cowboy. The room is quiet. The refrigerator hums. The fluorescent lights buzz in their casings. Katie can feel the medical student watching from the doorway. She can feel the weight of the moment, the kind of moment where a person either folds or holds their ground. "I request you review the imaging and vitals," Katie says. Her voice doesn't shake. Her hands don't tremble. The trembling is not fear. The trembling is restraint, the effort required to stand in front of someone who underestimates you and not correct them about exactly who you are. The clinical picture supports cardiac tamponade. Whitfield's jaw tightens. He takes one step closer to her. "I'm going to have security escort you out of this building if you don't stop practicing above your licensure. Do you understand? You are a nurse. Not a doctor. Not a clinician. A nurse. You follow orders. You don't give them. You certainly don't go around requesting procedures you're not qualified to understand." Katie sets her coffee cup down on the nearest counter. Her knuckles are white around the ceramic. She sets it down carefully, releasing the grip, watching the tremor subside as her hand uncurls. Then she turns and walks back toward the ICU. Her spine is straight. Her breathing is even. Her footsteps are measured. She walks to Harding's room and closes the door behind her. The monitor beeps its steady rhythm. The ventilator wheezes its mechanical breath. And Katie stands at the bedside of the man whose name is written in block letters on his arm, the man she carried 7 miles through enemy fire in the Jolin district, the man she has saved before and will save again, and she waits for the moment when every doctor who gave up will finally understand what they were looking at all along. The observation gallery at Cedar Creek Medical fell silent at exactly 1,400 hours. Dr. Whitfield stood before 24 residents and medical students, Katie's patient chart held above his head like evidence at a trial. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical song, and every eye in the tiered seating tilted downward toward the ICU floor where Katie stood, perfectly still, waiting for the blade to fall. "This," Whitfield announced, his voice amplified by the room's acoustics in a way that made the words carry weight they didn't deserve, "is what we call excessive emotional attachment clouding clinical judgment." He descended the gallery stairs, each footfall deliberate. Nurse Rodriguez has documented 14 interventions in 6 days for a patient with minimal neurological response. 14. Does she understand evidence-based protocols, or does she understand only feelings? The residents laughed. A ripple of condescension that moved through the room like wind through a canyon. Katie's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Her hands remained perfectly still at her sides. She did not flinch. She did not blink. She did not look away from Whitfield's face, and in that steady gaze was something he would never recognize, the calm of someone who had held a casualty collection point alone in Tikrit for 14 hours while rounds from an enemy position chewed the sandbags beside her. The calm of someone who had done things that would keep him awake at night if he ever learned about them. But he would not learn. Not today. Whitfield circled her like a shark that had tasted blood in the water. "How long have you been a nurse, Rodriguez? 2 years? 3? And you think you know better than attending neurologists with 15 years of training?" His voice dripped with the particular condescension reserved for those he perceived as inferior. "Better than board-certified specialists." "I follow physician orders," Katie said quietly. "And I document changes. You follow your emotions." Whitfield stepped closer, invading the space in a way that was calculated, practiced. "There's a difference between compassion and competence, Nightingale. And you, clearly, are confused about which one you possess." The residents watched. The observation gallery's glass walls contained the moment like an aquarium. Katie could feel their eyes on her the way she felt thermal imaging scopes across an open valley, a weight that was present but did not matter. What mattered was breathing. What mattered was keeping her face empty, her voice flat, her hand steady. What mattered was that Commander James Harding lay in a bed 3 floors below this theater of humiliation, and he needed her more than she needed dignity. She said nothing. Whitfield waited for a response that would not come, and the silence stretched between them like a physical thing. Somewhere in the building, a monitor beeped its mechanical rhythm. Someone in the gallery coughed. Whitfield smiled. He had broken her. Or so he believed. He turned back to the residents and continued his lecture, but something in his voice had changed, a slight edge, as if her refusal to shatter had somehow irritated him more than any argument could have. Katie turned and walked back toward the ICU, her stride measured and professional, every movement controlled. Behind her, she heard his voice resume, and she knew he would spend the next 20 minutes building his case against her for an audience that did not actually matter. By 15:30 that afternoon, the vending machine hummed its electric song in the break room, and Katie stood before it with her hand extended, selecting black coffee that tasted like antiseptic and regret. The machine hissed and clicked. Her cup fell into the tray below with a soft thud. Some people are born for grunt work, not critical thinking. She froze for exactly 1 second. Long enough to know he had planned this timing, planned this location, planned for her to hear him. Her eyes remained forward. She did not turn. Whitfield stood 10 feet away, speaking to Dr. Chen, the chief of surgery. His words were casual, conversational, the way you might comment on the weather. But there was no weather in the break room, only the smell of burnt coffee and the faint chemical tang of hand sanitizer. "We can't all be surgeons," Whitfield continued, "some of us are suited for different roles." He glanced directly at her. The look was sharp and deliberate, ensuring she understood that every word was aimed at her specifically, that the casual tone was a weapon just as much as his words were. Katie lifted the coffee cup from the dispenser. Her knuckles whitened around it, a momentary loss of control that she caught and locked down within 1 heartbeat. She could have thrown it. She could have emptied it across his shirt and walked out without explanation. But that would expose her. That would crack the mask. So instead, she set the cup down on the counter, untouched, and walked past Whitfield and Dr. Chen without acknowledgement, as if they were furniture in a hospital hallway rather than people. Behind her, she heard Whitfield continue his conversation with renewed energy, emboldened by what he interpreted as her submission. He had no idea who he was standing next to. At 18:20 hours, Katie approached the supply desk where Marcus, the night shift inventory clerk, was entering stock numbers into a computer. She placed a requisition form on the counter, her handwriting precise and professional. "Pericardiocentesis kit, 18-gauge needle, sterile field setup," she said quietly. Marcus looked at the form and started to reach for the cabinet. He was new, only 4 months at Cedar Creek, and he hadn't yet learned that certain requests triggered protocols he knew nothing about. "Excuse me." Whitfield's voice was loud enough for the entire nurses' station to hear. He had materialized from the hallway like something summoned from the walls themselves. His presence made the air pressure change, and every head at the station turned toward the sound. "Nurse Rodriguez, are you practicing above your licensure?" His words were surgical, precise, designed to cut and leave clean wounds. "Because I can have security escort you out right now for unauthorized requisitions. Do you understand scope of practice, or should I arrange remedial training from the licensing board?" Silence filled the nurse's station. The monitor at station 4 beeped once, twice, the sound seeming impossibly loud. Marcus's hand hovered over the supply cabinet, frozen in the moment between compliance and confusion. Katie did not raise her voice. She did not defend herself. She turned to look at Whitfield with eyes that revealed nothing, no fear, no anger, no shame. "The commander is showing signs of cardiac tamponade," she said flatly. "Distended neck veins, muffled heart sounds. The pericardiocentesis is prophylactic. I was documenting observations for the attending. You were ordering equipment you have no authority to order." Whitfield stepped closer, and his voice dropped into a register meant only for her, though the nurse's station was entirely silent now, everyone listening. "This is exactly the kind of insubordination I've been documenting. You follow your impulses, Nurse Rodriguez, and you dress them up as clinical instinct. There's a difference. One gets people killed. One keeps people alive. Guess which category you fall into?" Katie did not respond. Her composure in that moment was not the absence of feeling, it was the presence of absolute control. This was a woman who had rappelled from a helicopter into a firefight. Who had applied tourniquets to limbs that were no longer attached to bodies. Who had held pressure on a chest wound for 17 kilometers while rounds snapped past her head like angry insects. This was a woman for whom Dr. Whitfield's words were background noise, no more threatening than wind in empty corridors. "The kit," Marcus ventured quietly. "The kit stays in the cabinet," Whitfield said without breaking eye contact with Katie. "I'm implementing a new protocol effective immediately. All non-standard requisitions must be approved by me personally, in writing, before procurement. And if I catch you circumventing that again, Rodriguez, you won't be working here by end of shift. Do you understand me?" "Understood," Katie said. She walked back to the ICU, and Whitfield watched her go with the expression of a man who believed he had won a battle. He had not understood that she was already 3 moves ahead, already calculating what would happen when the monitor alarmed at 0300, already preparing for the moment when his protocols would become a liability and her choices would become the only thing standing between a Navy SEAL and death. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Whitfield did not work alone. Within the hour, he had picked up his hospital phone and called Patricia Vandermock, a board member and college roommate's mother, describing Katie in clinical terms that were technically accurate but fundamentally false, emotionally unstable, possibly fabricating patient symptoms for attention, pattern of concerning judgment. By 1900, he had contacted her listed references at the Navy Medical Placement Program, a cover organization that would confirm only her nursing credentials, never mentioning the intelligence assignment, never explaining why a Master Chief Petty Officer would be working as a floor nurse under an assumed name. By 1100 the next morning, an outside investigator from the State Nursing Board had arrived at Cedar Creek, clipboard in hand, with instructions to observe Katie's patient interactions and document any violations. She worked with perfect stoicism, never breaking protocol, her movements precise and practiced, while Whitfield watched from the hallway like a predator who had finally cornered its prey. He did not know that he was the one walking into a trap. He did not know that the Navy already had its eye on him, that his phone records were being monitored, that every call he made to discredit her was being catalogued and analyzed by people who worked in buildings with no windows and access levels that cleared for classified operations he would never comprehend. Katie changed Harding's position at 11:15, checking the monitor, adjusting his ventilator, her hands moving with the fluid precision of muscle memory honed across 3 tours and 2 continents. The investigator watched. Whitfield watched. Neither of them understood that they were witnessing the actions of a warrior who had simply chosen a different battlefield, who had traded her rifle for a stethoscope because the mission required it, because her commander needed her, because sometimes saving lives required operating behind enemy lines wearing borrowed credentials and a borrowed name. The ones who have seen the worst often give the most, and Katie Rodriguez had seen things that would never leave her, and she was still giving everything. The parking garage at Cedar Creek Medical smelled like diesel exhaust and wet concrete. Katie sat in her car at 18:47 hours, hand steady on the steering wheel, burner phone pressed to her ear. The Virginia number connected on the second ring. No greeting. Never a greeting. Status, the voice said. ICE authority. Commander Harding remains unconscious. GCS 3. Katie kept her voice level, clinical. No change from morning assessment. Silence. Then, intelligence recovery depends on consciousness. Any timeline. Katie watched a doctor walk past her car, headlights catching the rain on the windshield. Neurologist estimates 48 to 72 hours before he regains awareness. Maybe longer. The shrapnel trajectory missed the motor cortex, but the swelling. I don't need anatomy lessons, Rodriguez. I need to know if he talks. She didn't flinch at the use of her real name. In this car, alone, she was Catherine Rodriguez again. Master Chief Petty Officer, Naval Special Warfare Command. Attached to Task Force 2-1, JSOC Black Operations. The woman in Cedar Creek scrubs was someone else entirely. The woman in this car remembered Tikrit. Remembered 14 hours holding a casualty collection point alone while rounds snapped overhead like angry wasps. Remembered Harding's arm around her shoulders as they moved through the Jolin district with 2 rounds left and 6 kilometers between them and the extraction point. He'll talk, Katie said. He always does. But the window is closing. Explain. His vitals are trending. Nothing dramatic yet. But I'm seeing deterioration patterns consistent with fluid accumulation around the cardiac sac. Cardiac tamponade. If it develops untreated, he'll be dead before consciousness matters. Another silence. Longer this time. Katie could hear the ambient noise on the other end, a radio, someone speaking in the background, the distinct sound of a secure facility somewhere in Virginia. Can you treat it? The voice asked. Yes. But Whitfield has restricted my access to pericardiocentesis equipment. Any intervention I perform will be documented, investigated, used as evidence that I exceeded my scope of practice. It will destroy my cover and trigger a full background audit. Then don't get caught. The line went dead. Katie sat with the phone in her lap, watching rain streak the windshield. She'd served in for combat deployments. She'd seen men die from wounds that were treatable. She'd learned early that combat wasn't about having all the answers, it was about moving forward despite never having enough information, never having enough supplies, never having enough time. She'd learned that the difference between a live casualty and a dead one was often someone willing to violate protocol. She started the car. 19:03 hours. Night shift started at 19:30. The ICU at Cedar Creek smelled like antiseptic and the faint copper tang of old blood. Katie moved through her rounds with the same precision she'd used in Fallujah, checking every monitor, every line, reading the machines the way other people read faces. In her experience, machines never lied. People lied. People looked away. People told you everything was stable when your eyes could see the trajectory trending toward disaster. Harding's room was the last on her circuit. She stood in the doorway for 3 seconds, just watching. His frame was smaller than she remembered. The explosion that had sent him into unconsciousness had burned away 30 pounds. The tattooed arm, the one bearing her name in block letters from before either of them understood what Tikrit would require of them, lay across the blanket, pale and still. She moved to his bedside. The floor was clean. The ventilator setting remained unchanged. But the monitor told a different story. Blood pressure 118/76 at shift change. Now 114/72. A downward trend that looked innocent in isolation but terrifying when you understood the trajectory. Central venous pressure climbing. Heart sounds increasingly muffled. The fluid was gathering. Physics and time working against them both. Katie reviewed the chart. Whitfield had documented his assessment from afternoon rounds in his characteristic style: dismissive, final, closed to revision. Patient stable. No acute change. Continue current supportive care. Any concerns regarding vital trends should be reported immediately to physician supervising MD NP Rodriguez to restrict documentation to standard observations only. Translation: don't tell me anything unless he codes. Don't make judgments. Don't think. Just watch. She pulled up the vitals monitor on her phone. Cedar Creek's system allowed nurses access to trending data for patients in their care. The graph was a shallow downward slope that would look unremarkable in isolation. But she'd trained with trauma surgeons who taught her to read these trends the way a sniper reads wind. A 5 mm downward movement in a graph could mean the difference between a successful intervention and a dead patient on your hands. At 21:47, she paged the on-call resident. A voice answered after 14 seconds, young, tired, clearly pulled away from something else. "This is Dr. Chen." "Dr. Chen, this is Katie Rodriguez from ICU. I'm calling about Commander Harding in room for 12. His blood pressure is trending downward over the past 6 hours. Central venous pressure elevated. I'm concerned we're seeing early signs of cardiac tamponade. I'd like to recommend a repeat echocardiogram and prepare for possible pericardiocentesis." Silence. Then, has his BP dropped below 100? Not yet. But the trajectory? Then he's stable. Trauma patients fluctuate. Continue monitoring and call me if his systolic hits 90. Otherwise, let him sleep. The line went dead. Katie stood in the medication dispensary, breathing. Not anger. Anger was inefficient. This was just information. Chen was 2 years out of medical school, burned out, learning to think in binary, coding vital signs, not caring about trends. He would learn or he would hurt people. Either way, not her problem to solve. Except she was solving it. She'd already decided, somewhere between the parking garage and the ventilator hiss, that she was solving it. She documented her observations in Harding's chart, timestamp 2149 hours. Each reading with her notation. 1:18:76, 1:14:72, 1:12:70, the descent laid out in numbers that would be discoverable later. She noted the muffled heart sounds. She noted the elevated CVP. She noted her recommendation for additional imaging and the resident's refusal. All of it official. All of it legally protected because she had called, had documented, had done everything within protocol. Then she moved to the supply room. The pericardiocentesis kit was on the second shelf, locked in a cabinet. Katie had watched Whitfield place it there after she'd requested it in front of 24 medical residents. A deliberate lockdown. A power play. She'd memorized the combination during her first week, a habit from decades of looking at the small details no one else noticed. 34-18-07, a birth date, probably. Someone's daughter's birthday coded into hospital security. She gathered what she would need. The 14-gauge needle from the cardiac trauma kit. Ultrasound machine from the adjacent room, she could have it back in 8 minutes. The pericardiocentesis tray, still in its original packaging. She rolled it all on a quiet cart to the corner of the supply room where the nurse's bathroom was located, positioning it out of sight from the main ICU corridor. Then she called Virginia again. Same number. Different person answered. "This is Reaper," Katie said. The call sign felt strange in her mouth. She hadn't used it since Tikrit. "Stand by." 30 seconds of hold silence. The original voice returned. Status. Harding's condition is deteriorating. Cardiac tamponade developing. Whitfield has made it impossible for me to obtain proper diagnostic imaging or prepare for intervention. If I do nothing, he'll be dead within 12 hours. If I intervene, my cover is compromised. I'm requesting instruction. She heard something that might have been breathing. Might have been recognition. Mission priority is intelligence recovery. If he dies, the intelligence dies. Maintain cover at all costs. Katie waited for more. There was no more. So I do nothing, she said. And he dies. And you lose the intelligence anyway. Those are your choices, Rodriguez. You chose to take this assignment. You knew the parameters. The parameters assumed medical support would be available. Whitfield is actively preventing treatment. He's sabotaging care deliberately. Then document it officially and escalate through proper channels. Katie almost laughed. Almost. I'm a contract nurse with a fabricated employment history. My references are military fabrications. If I escalate, the hospital audits my credentials and discovers I'm not who I claim to be. Then the mission ends and so does my clearance. Silence that lasted for seconds. What are you asking me, Rodriguez? I'm asking if I have permission to save his life knowing it will end my assignment. Another silence. This one felt different. Felt like someone in Virginia was calculating the cost-benefit analysis of losing an operative versus losing a Navy commander's intelligence recovery window. No, the voice finally said. Maintain cover. That is an order. The line went dead for the second time. Katie stood in the bathroom stall with the burner phone in her hand, her reflection visible in the chrome dispenser. She didn't look like Catherine Rodriguez right now. She looked like Katie Rodriguez the nurse. Younger. Smaller. Constrained in the shape of someone else's expectations. She thought about Harding's eyes when he'd recognized her in Fallujah. The way he'd gripped her arm when the convoy had come under fire and they'd thrown themselves into a ravine that smelled like burning diesel and smoke. She thought about holding pressure on his wounds while sand worked its way into the bandages. She thought about the moment she'd realized he'd been tagged with her call sign before she'd even earned it, the way he'd looked at her across a phi base knowing that she was the only thing standing between him and bleeding out on a rooftop in Tikrit. She thought about 14 hours alone. At 2,312 hours, Katie was standing at Harding's bedside when his blood pressure dropped to 110/68. At 23:47, it was 104/64. The trend was accelerating. CVP was now 14 centimeters of water. His heart sounds were nearly inaudible beneath the ventilator noise. She returned to the supply room, where the equipment waited like a promise she'd made to herself years ago in the Jolan district. The next voice she heard, the one that mattered, wasn't from Virginia. It was going to be her own. The monitor's alarm pierced the darkness at 0303, a sustained shriek that split the fourth-floor ICU like a blade. Katie stood at Commander Harding's bedside, eyes tracking the numbers cascading downward across the screen. Blood pressure 68/40. Falling. The kind of pressure that meant minutes, not hours. Beck's triad. Distended neck veins. Muffled heart sounds. Hypertension. Cardiac tamponade. The pericardial sac was filling with blood, squeezing his heart like a fist closing around tissue paper. Whitfield had blocked her access to the kit yesterday. Said she was practicing above her licensure. Said she'd be escorted out if she tried again. He'd made those threats in the vending machine, loud enough for 3 nurses to hear, loud enough to establish that any intervention from her would be insubordination. The monitor screamed again. 64/38. Katie's hands moved. She wasn't thinking. Muscle memory took over, the same way it had in Tikrit when the IED detonated 3 meters from her position, the same way it had when she'd run a surgical airway in a sandstorm without gloves, without light, with nothing but the weight of a Marine's life in her hands. Her fingers found the emergency pericardiocentesis kit in the locked drawer, the one Whitfield didn't know existed, the one she'd moved there 3 days ago from the supply closet after his restrictions went live. 20 years of combat medicine didn't disappear because a doctor said so. 20 years lived in the space between protocol and survival. She prepped Harding's subxiphoid area with betadine in 3 efficient strokes. The smell of iodine cut through the antiseptic hospital air. Her voice was steady when she called for Morrison, "I need you to document this." Patient presenting with Beck's triad, BP deteriorating, imminent cardiac arrest. I'm performing needle decompression per ACLS protocol. Morrison appeared in the doorway, a second-year resident with smart eyes and the good sense not to argue. 3 other attending physicians froze behind him, mouths open, watching a nurse cross a line drawn in institutional power rather than medical law. Katie advanced the needle at a 30-degree angle toward Harding's left shoulder, her hand steady as surgical lasers. There was no tremor. There was no doubt. There was only the fluid precision of someone who'd already survived the worst. 50 milliliters of blood aspirated. 60. The pressure monitor climbed, 72/44. Then 84/50 seconds. Then 94/60 seconds as she withdrew the needle and applied pressure to the puncture site. "Where did you learn?" Morrison whispered. Katie didn't answer. She was already documenting. Timestamp. Volume. Vital response. Her face completely neutral, the expression of someone clocking out of her shift, not someone who'd just crossed a threshold she couldn't walk back from. The room hummed with the fluorescent silence of people who'd just watched something they weren't supposed to see. Dr. Whitfield arrived at 0319 in pajamas under his coat, his thinning hair still creased from his pillow. He must have driven faster than the speed limit from his house in the West Hills. Someone had called him. Someone always called him. He stopped at the foot of Harding's bed, eyes moving from the used kit on the sterile field to the climbing vital signs on the monitor to Katie's face, which revealed nothing at all. His face went the color of old brick. "You performed a surgical procedure," he said, each word careful and controlled, the way someone spoke when they were in the process of deciding how to destroy you. "Without authorization. Without physician supervision." Katie stood. Her voice dropped an octave. Patient presented with Beck's triad and imminent cardiac arrest. Needle decompression per ACLS guidelines. Standard emergency protocol. Whitfield's composure fractured. "You're done." Not yelling. Worse than yelling. The words came out like he was pronouncing a death sentence, and his hands were already reaching for his phone. "Security can escort you out, or you can leave now. Your choice. But your shift is over. Your career at Cedar Creek Medical is over. Permanently." He didn't wait for her response. He turned and walked out, pulling his phone to his ear before he even reached the doorway, his voice dropping to the hiss of a snake. "Patricia, it's Richard. We have a serious problem." "No, worse than we discussed." She actually did it. She performed a pericardiocentesis without authorization. "Yes, I'm serious. Get the investigator back here at 6 a.m. We're building the termination case tonight." By 0700, Katie's badge was deactivated. A security guard she'd never seen before, a young man with guilty eyes who clearly didn't want to be there, handed her an envelope from Human Resources. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Katie took it without comment. By 0830, Whitfield had called Patricia Vandermock and the CEO, building his narrative, the rogue nurse practicing medicine without a license. Creating massive liability. Endangering patients. "We documented it. We have witnesses. The investigator is preparing a 17-page report. Each call another hammer blow. Each conversation another nail in the coffin he was building." By 1100, Carol Simmons and the state investigator had documented her actions in a report so thorough and so poisonous that it read like evidence of criminal negligence rather than emergency intervention. Gross violation of scope of practice. Pattern of insubordination. Reckless endangerment. Unauthorized performance of advanced procedures. Every word chosen to make her choices sound not like medicine but like rebellion. By 1200, Katie stood in an HR office on the 3rd floor while a woman named Jennifer read the termination notice aloud. "Effective immediately, your employment is terminated for cause. Your access to Cedar Creek Medical facilities is revoked. Your nursing credentials are under review by the Oregon Board of Nursing pending investigation." Jennifer wouldn't make eye contact. Nobody wanted to be the one to fire a nurse who'd saved a patient's life, which is exactly why Whitfield had orchestrated it this way. He'd made it so she had no allies. No witnesses who would publicly defend her. No one willing to say that what she'd done was right, because she'd done it alone, in the dark, without permission from people who mattered. Katie walked to her locker carrying a cardboard box from the supply closet. Her coffee mug. A thank you card from a patient's family, dated 3 years ago. And at the bottom, wrapped in a spare scrub top, the worn pair of combat boots. The only possession she'd salvaged from Tikrit before assuming this identity. She held them for a long moment, her hand steady, then placed them carefully in the box. The weight of those boots was the weight of 8 years of lying. 8 years of being just a nurse. 8 years of watching protocol matter more than people. 8 years of following rules written by people who'd never carried a casualty 7 miles through enemy fire. She'd saved Harding's life. And they were firing her for it. That thought sat cold in her chest as she drove home to an apartment in northeast Portland, afternoon sun painting the wet streets gold. She didn't turn on the radio. Didn't make any calls. Just drove with both hands on the wheel, knowing that somewhere, someone had already been tasked with pulling her cover apart. Knowing that Virginia would have to move her. Knowing that her daughter would have to change schools again, change her name again, change everything again, because Katie had made the choice to let the Hippocratic Oath matter more than the classified briefing she'd received. At 16:30, Mia found her at the kitchen table. 8 years old and already fluent in the language of upheaval, she knew the smell of it, the weight of it, the way it arrived on a parent's face before any words could explain it. Her daughter stood in the doorway of their small rented kitchen, backpack still on her shoulders, and her small voice was the loudest thing Katie had heard all day. "Mommy, why are you home when the sun is still up?" Katie couldn't answer. She'd spent 20 years knowing exactly what to do, how to save lives, how to lead teams, how to make decisions when every second mattered. But she had no words for this. No medical procedure to fix this. No combat experience that trained you for the moment your daughter discovers that doing the right thing costs everything. The tears came then, cutting tracks down her face for the first time in 8 years. Not the quiet, controlled tears of someone processing grief. But the kind that come from 8 years of holding a line that no one knew existed, 8 years of watching people she respected be destroyed by people she didn't, 8 years of choosing to disappear rather than speak the truth. She was still sitting there 3 hours later when her phone rang. Unknown number. Her handler, Virginia, calling from a secure line to tell her what she already knew, that her cover was compromised, that the Navy had been notified, that everything they'd built had just collapsed like a house made of cards in a hospital where one man decided that policy mattered more than lives. 3 days later, the hospital lobby television flashed breaking news at 13:20. The entire cafeteria fell silent. 60 people staring at a screen that showed a military photograph, dress whites, Navy anchor insignia, rows of ribbons that caught the fluorescent light like a constellation. Decorated Navy Master Chief Petty Officer Catherine Rodriguez missing after an authorized departure from witness protection assignment, the banner read across the bottom. That's when everything changed. Commander Harding's eyes stayed fixed on the television screen mounted in the hospital lobby. The news banner scrolled across the bottom in stark white letters, Decorated Navy Master Chief Petty Officer Catherine Rodriguez missing after an authorized departure from witness protection assignment. His tattooed arm, the one bearing her name in block letters, trembled. Not from weakness. From recognition. He whispered it like a prayer, like a call sign that had kept him alive through 7 miles of Tikrit heat and enemy fire, Reaper. The veteran security guard, Mike Patterson, had served in Fallujah with the 1st Marines. He heard that whisper. He turned to the cafeteria workers and spoke loud enough for the news cameras now flooding the lobby to catch every word. That woman is a Master Chief Petty Officer. A decorated war hero. You ignorant bastards didn't deserve her. His voice carried the weight of someone who recognized rank when the rest of the world saw only scrubs and a smile. The lobby fell into the kind of silence that precedes earthquakes. Within 60 minutes, a Navy Rear Admiral arrived through the main entrance. Admiral Webb. 42 years of service, 3 Joint Chiefs recommendations, the kind of presence that made air pressure change. He moved past the reception desk with Harding's medical file in hand, the classified sections now declassified for what came next. Cameras swiveled. Reporters pressed forward. Webb ignored them all and walked directly to the hospital CEO's office. Margaret Torres, Cedar Creek Medical's chief executive officer, was 47 years old and had built her career on saying the right thing at the right time. This was not that moment. This was the moment she realized she had employed a man who had dismantled a federal operative's cover for wanting to save a patient's life. Admiral Webb's voice in her office was quieter than his presence. Quieter voices carry more weight. Master Chief Rodriguez was operating under federal assignment, monitoring Commander Harding for national security purposes. Dr. Whitfield interfered with a classified operation and endangered a federal operative. He placed a folder on her desk. Inside, Katie's official citation from Tikrit. She held a casualty collection point alone for 14 hours. 14 hours. While your chief of surgery was ordering her to follow protocols, she was making life-or-death decisions with a 9mm and a trauma kit. Torres opened the folder. Stop breathing for 3 seconds. Webb continued, Dr. Whitfield's termination of her employment, his revocation of her access, his documentation campaign, these actions directly compromised operational security and placed Commander Harding at critical risk during an intelligence recovery window. The Admiral's jaw tightened like wire being wound. Your unconscious SEAL patient would be dead if Master Chief Rodriguez had followed your Chief of Surgery's orders. He would be in a body bag right now instead of sitting in that ICU bed, conscious, because she performed an emergency needle decompression with the precision of someone who has done this in sandstorms and firefights. Torres's phone buzzed. Then again. Then for more times in succession. Board members calling. Board members withdrawing support. Board members who had just learned that federal involvement would trigger full compliance audits of the entire hospital's patient privacy protocols, security clearances, and administrative structure. This wasn't about one doctor anymore. This was about institutional liability. Torres made the decision in real time, cameras positioned to capture every frame. Dr. Whitfield is terminated effective immediately. Security will escort him from the building. She picked up her desk phone and dialed. I'm calling the medical board. This termination is being reported within the hour. The lobby erupted as security approached Whitfield in the hallway. He stood frozen, his white coat suddenly looking like a costume that no longer fit. You can't do this. I have connections. Patricia Vandermock on the board will. Torres's voice cut through the commotion like a scalpel. Ms. Vandermock resigned 40 minutes ago after I informed her of federal involvement. You're finished here, Doctor. 2 security guards flanked him, not roughly, but deliberately. Whitfield's face cycled through expressions like a broken video: shock, rage, denial, terror. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. One news anchor caught it perfectly. A Navy admiral just arrived at Cedar Creek Medical. We're hearing termination, federal investigation, and something about a classified operative. Mike Patterson stood near the ICU entrance, arms crossed, watching Whitfield be escorted past the nurse's station. One nurse whispered to another, he called her Nightingale. He mocked her. He said she was practicing above her licensure. Another voice, he threatened to have security escort her out. Patterson's response carried to 3 states via social media within hours. He disrespected a Master Chief who took shrapnel to her spine, saving a Navy SEAL from a grenade. He called her incompetent because she was better than him. And the Navy just ended his career live on national television. Harding watched all of it from his wheelchair, his fur still running fluids, his catheter still in place, his mind still reassembling itself like scattered puzzle pieces being pressed back together. He watched Whitfield disappear through the automatic doors. He watched the Admiral shake the CEO's hand. He watched the security guard who knew his name turn toward the ICU with a nod that meant everything. Then he looked at the hospital lobby again, where a new photograph was being displayed on the evening news. Master Chief Catherine Rodriguez in her Navy dress blues, her service record glowing with medals and citations, her official Navy biography now public because operational security had shattered the moment she was exposed. The room went so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights hum. Whitfield's medical license entered formal review by the State Board within 48 hours. Hospitals across the Portland metropolitan region and beyond began quietly reaching out to their credentialing committees. His name appeared on a list that spreads between institutions like a warning: do not hire, do not consult, do not associate. Within 3 months, his malpractice insurance was dropped. Within 6 months, his privileges were terminated at every hospital in the state. Medical institutions, it turned out, took federal involvement very seriously. 6 months later, a nurse friend named Sarah texted Katie a photograph. Katie stood in her apartment, off shift, still wearing scrubs that now felt like they belonged to someone else. The photo showed a folding table outside a Safeway in Beaverton. On the table, pamphlets for supplemental health insurance. Behind the table, Dr. Whitfield, his white coat gone, his authority erased, his voice now used to pitch coverage plans to people walking past who didn't know his name and wouldn't have cared if they did. Katie didn't smile. She simply closed the text and set her phone down. That evening, Katie stood in Commander Harding's hospital room on his discharge day. 9 months had passed since the emergency decompression. 9 months of physical therapy, occupational therapy, neuropsychological recovery. His cognitive function had returned almost entirely. His strength was returning. His memory was reassembling itself, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to remember Reaper. Enough to remember 7 miles through enemy fire with a medic who refused to let him die. She was wearing her Navy service dress blues. The uniform felt like home in a way her scrubs never had. The Master Chief anchor was pinned to her collar, the rank insignia of someone who had earned the right to command. Her shoulder boards gleamed under the hospital lights. She moved with the authority of someone who had nothing left to prove because she had already proven everything that mattered. "I brought something," Katie said quietly. She reached into her bag and pulled out the worn combat boots. Desert sand was still in the treads. The leather was scarred and creased from years of patrol, years of movement, years of surviving. "These are yours. I carried them out of Tikrit because you asked me to carry them. You said your daughter gave them to you before deployment. You said they were lucky." Harding took them slowly, as if they were made of something fragile. He held them like relics. His eyes filled with water that he didn't bother to stop. "I remember now. Pieces, anyway. I remember your voice. Telling me to stay awake. Telling me you had me. Telling me," he stopped. Looked at the boots. "You carried these 7 miles. 10, actually," Katie said. "But who's counting?" A sound escaped Harding's chest that was half laugh, half sob. "Reaper." "That's right, Commander." Admiral Webb appeared in the doorway, new orders in hand. Katie's new assignment, a promotion to a training command position at Naval Medical Center San Diego, developing combat medical curriculum for the next generation of Navy medics. Teaching. Passing forward everything she had learned in sand and blood and smoke. "Time to train the next Reapers, Master Chief," Webb said quietly. It wasn't a request. It was a command dressed up in kindness. Katie nodded. She reached out and squeezed Harding's shoulder once, just once, the kind of pressure that meant everything between warriors. "You stay alive, Commander. You remember your daughter. You remember those boots meant something. They meant you came back," Harding said. "That's what they mean." As Katie left the ICU, she passed the nurses' station where staff had hung a small plaque on the wall, in honor of Master Chief Catherine Rodriguez, who taught us that rank is earned in the hardest moments. Someone had added a single word in permanent marker below it, Reaper. That evening, Katie sat on her apartment couch with her 8-year-old daughter, Mia, for the first time in what felt like years. Local news ran a follow-up segment, former Cedar Creek Medical chief of surgery now selling insurance. The footage showed Whitfield at his folding table outside a Beaverton grocery store, his voice thin and desperate as he pitched coverage plans to passers-by who barely glanced at him. No one knew his name. No one would ever know his name again. Katie turned off the television. Mia looked up at her, finally understanding why Mommy had been gone so much, why Mommy had cried at the kitchen table that one terrible night, why everything had changed and then changed again. Katie pulled her daughter close and spoke softly, "The ones who have seen the worst often give the most." Mia didn't fully understand, not yet. But she held on to her mother like she would never let go, and Katie held back, and for the first time in years, the Master Chief simply allowed herself to be Mom. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated and wanted vindication, if you know what it takes to stay silent when the world doubts you, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. Like this video if you believe the quietest people in the room might just be the ones holding everything together. And tell us in the comments, would you have saved him, or walked away? What would you have done in Katie's position? We read every single comment, and your stories matter.